So I'd like to introduce our two guests with us today. First, we have Lee Bey, and we also have Scott Mehaffey. Um, now, I'll tell you a little bit about both of them, and then we'll get into the program. So Lee Bey is an architectural photographer. He's also an adjunct professor at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and he's on the editorial board of the Chicago Sun-Times. Lee has worked as a general assignment reporter for the Sun-Times and the paper's architecture critic. He has also served as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Planning and Design for Mayor Richard Daley. You might remember him for some of our loyal patrons. He was at our library a couple years ago and he shared his beautiful book, Southern Exposure, the Overlooked Architecture of Chicago's South Side. So Lee's going to start off our program, and then Scott's going to join us later on. Scott Mehaffey is the Executive Director of the 56-acre Farnsworth House National Historic Landmark, which is a site on the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Scott was a landscape coordinator for the city of Chicago, also under Mayor Richard Daley, and for many years was a landscape architect for the Morton Arboretum. He has also taught at the Illinois Institute of Technology. So welcome to Lee and Scott. And well, we're going to turn things over to Lee, and Scott and I are going to turn off our cameras and our microphones, but we'll be back at the end where you can hear more about what's happening at the house currently, and then we will take questions. So welcome, Lee, and we're looking forward to hearing from you today.
Thank you. Good to be here. We're going to have an interesting tale. 75 years in one of the most interesting architecture stories in the country, let alone in the area, where there is everything from drama to flooding to disputes to maybe even a movie made out of all of this at some point. So with that, let me just jump in and share my screen. And and to everyone in the audience, as I told Roz and Scott, I'm very nearsighted, and I broke my glasses yesterday. So you may see me squinting a bit to get to notes. Normally, you can't tell when I'm looking at the notes, but today you'll be able to tell. So I apologize in advance for that. Let's see. Let's get to the. All right, there we are, the Farnsworth House in Plano, Illinois, way south of Chicago. And what a beautiful, obviously, piece of architecture. Designed, of course, by Mies van der Rohe, as Roz said, they're currently owned by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, is steel and glass and wood. And limestone for the steps, but just beautiful, simple, serene. You'll know that it rises above the prairie, not far from it's located. I think what's got 100 yards from the Fox River, but it rises above it by 5 feet, designed for the floodwaters to run underneath if the flood rises. You'll note that there are no walls, really. I mean, other than the glass exterior walls and the Primavera core at the beginning. But, you know, if you know the architecture of Mies van der Rohe and the idea of less being more, this embodies it. So these are the two of the three forces, if you will, that are responsible for this wonderful building. This is Edith Farnsworth on our left, Dr. Edith Farnsworth, and of course, Mies van der Rohe on the right, standing in front of a model of Crown Hall, which is, along with Farnsworth House and 860, 880 Lakeshore Drive, you know, really typifies the forward-looking, forward-thinking design of Mies van der Rohe. And the other person, the other force that plays a role in this is the mighty Fox River, which this is built by, which this is built near. And we'll hear more. We'll hear about the first two forces, but we'll hear more about this force as the story goes on. So here's Mies looking at a model of the Farnsworth House with his kind of sketch behind him. So Mies and Edith Farnsworth met in 1945. And, Mies, immigrant from Germany, he's 60, almost 60, and his best work is actually ahead of him. He would go on to design after this moment in 1945, Crown Hall, 860, 880 Lakeshore Drive, the IIT campus, Lafayette apartments. I mean, all the things that that we know Mies van der Rohe, that Mark Mies van der Rohe's work, all those high points, they're ahead of them. They're ahead of them. Edith Farnsworth, on the other hand, is in her stride. She is a professor, a doctor. She was a kidney specialist. She graduated from Northwestern University, their medical school. She was wealthy. She was 6 feet tall, confident, self-assured. She studied the violin under Mario Corti in Italy. So she clearly was a woman who had arrived, if you will. They meet at a party in 1945, and the quote at this party, and this is where I must indulge you one more time. She tells Mies at a party that she wants to build, she bought land near the Fox River, and that she wants to build a weekend getaway place for herself. And she tells Mies, I wonder if there might be some young man in your office who would be willing to design a small studio weekend house worthy of that lovely shore. And Mies's response was, I would love to build any kind of house for you. And with that, the drama begins. Mies was impressed by Farnsworth for the reasons that we clearly saw. Um, and again, she was a remarkable woman. Um, Scott, who's with us on this call, told me for a story for the National Trust magazine a couple of years ago, about a year and a half or so ago. He describes her, he says, she was kind of a risk taker her whole life. She convinced her parents to let her live in Italy at age 19 and to come back and to major in medicine, which was unique for a woman at the time because Northwestern only had a limit of 4 women per class. So that gives you a sense of how distinguished she was. Now, Mies was supposed to design for Edith Farnsworth, clearly a simple place where she could commune with nature and relax there on the banks of the Fox River. And the original budget for it was $40,000. She ended up paying a lot more, but let's look at a few pictures along the way. Here's another view of Mies's model for the house, a little different than what we've got, but still very much all those elements there. Here's a picture of the house under construction, and you see the steel bones of the house, which identify, which mark the house's character. You see it coming, obviously, rising out of the land there. Now, what's interesting is Farnsworth House belongs to a class of unique modernist houses. Most notably, many of you may recognize Philip Johnson's Glass House in New Canaan, Connecticut, built a few years before. While Johnson's house, superlative steel and glass house, hugs the land, really rooted into the land. We see with Mies's house, as we see, he rises above it. Oh, by the way, before I get any further, I really should give credit to the photographers whose work you're going to see in this presentation. Later on, you'll see William Zabarin, who took some images of the inside of the house for an exhibit that I think Scott is going to maybe talk a little bit about. The photographs, color photographs that you'll see throughout this, other than Williams, other than Bill's, are going to be by Carol Highsmith, who took these fantastic images that you can find on the Library of Congress website. So you'll see some here, but she shot a lot more in 1980, which really gives you a sense of the house. And of course, the black and white images, these and a few others, are by Hedrick Blessing, the noted and no longer in business architecture photography firm, which documented Mies's work, SOM, really the work of the almost 70%, 60% of the 20th century. So again, Philip Johnson's house in New Canaan. You see the differences between the two. There's steel and glass, maybe cousins in a way, but clearly Mises is a bit different. It also belongs to a class of buildings, suburbia in the 19 post-war years was an interesting place where money and land and wealth all began to get together. You get these unique individuals. We think of suburbia as the place of the track home, and there's a lot of that in ranch houses. But here and again, there are interesting things. This is a house in Aurora, designed by Bruce Goff for Ruth Van Ford Sickle, an artist, and her husband. And Goff breaks every rule that you possibly can. He bends the steel as opposed to keeping it straight. He uses coal on the inside. The joke was people would ask him, doesn't coal burn? And he said, so does wood. And we build houses out of wood. But just clearly a one-of-a-kind house. Let's go inside. Here's the coal walls, but circular. This is from 1949, so they're coming around Farnsworth and this house right around the same time. Her furniture is more traditional, as you can see, and we'll see the difference between what she did here and what Mies did in what was done with the Farnsworth house in a few seconds. These individuals also clearly had a sense of humor, right? I like what the quote at the bottom, "We don't like your house either," the Fords say to any passerby who dare judges their house. So again, another construction photo of the Farnsworth house coming together. Here it is finished. Another Hedrick Blessing photograph. Look at the stairs. Look at that. I mean, just enough, just enough to get the job done. The steel and travertine and the steel stairs. I mean, the steel and travertine stairs lead to this porch, which of course lead to the house. So now inside, there is this core, and around it is everything. So clearly on this side, there's the living side of the house, and you also get a sense from this photograph of how open it is. You can see straight in, you can see straight out, bringing the owner and nature together. On the other side, here's the kitchen. Wow, isn't that cool? Galley kitchen of sorts, and you're right there against the window. You're right there. Now, the problem is there's Edith Farnsworth on her couch. Has she fainted? Well, maybe, because as it turns out, she, as revolutionary as the house was, as iconic as the house was, she didn't like it. And it's too much glass, too much exposure. They tussled a bit over the furnishings, and Mies didn't like, at least according to legend, the curtains that she hung up in the place. As Scott told me, it was one problem after another, particularly with the construction, and she was frustrated. The house ended up costing her $74,000 and not 40. And Mies' biographer, Franz Schultz, says in his 1985 book that Mies and Dr. Farnsworth together, that it was a clash of two personalities of immense force and authority. Because the house cost almost twice as much as the original budget, she didn't want to pay, and Mies filed a mechanics lien. And in Illinois, if you know liens, those are almost impossible, can be impossible to get out of. She files a lien against the building to recover his costs, and she countersues, alleging malpractice. So they both land in court. Very much that clash of personalities that Franz talked about. Mies, in defending himself, essentially says, why is she suing me? She approved the design changes that increased the cost of construction. And with that argument, he wins the suit. and Farnsworth's suit was dismissed, but they reached a settlement of some sort. Uh, what she said about the house, and she said it in 1953 for House Beautiful magazine. One of the reasons why she didn't like the house is that she says, Farnsworth says, the truth is that in this house with its four glass walls, I feel like a prowling animal, always on the alert. I am restless, even in the evening. I feel like a sentinel on guard day and night. She also didn't like the fact that the glass steamed up. The glass steamed up under certain conditions. She said, you feel as though you're in the car in the rain and the windshield wiper won't work. So, so there obviously some problems, some issues there between she and the house, between she and the architect, and she moves away from the house, ends up leaving the house, and it goes to sold to Lord Palumbo, who's the owner of the house when during the colored photographs that you saw at the beginning and that you'll begin to see now. The other force, of course, as I mentioned, Mies is one force, Dr. Farnsworth is the other, and the other is the Fox River. Now, this gives you a sense. Obviously, the thick blue line down the middle is the Fox River. Um, no joke when it comes to rivers. It starts off in Wisconsin, and it runs south for 200 miles until it gets near Ottawa, Illinois. But the thing about it is that along the way, the river is essentially falling 470 square feet as it flows south, and that height difference, as you can imagine, gives the river a force when it goes by. In fact, they used to drive mills and dams along the waterway. That gives you a sense of how much power is there. So when there's heavy rains, especially, you can see, the floodplain. Even here, you can see how it begins to, how we can flood. So this obviously was a problem. Mies took that into consideration when he built the house. But we didn't know, for all the climate reasons that we all now know, is that flooding of the Fox River could get progressively worse as time goes on. In 2000, I'm sorry, in 1996, when Lord Palumbo owned the house, a 10-foot a 10-foot wall of surging waters crashes through those glass walls, causing all kinds of damage. Supposedly pieces from the house are floating down the river, and the house was restored after. In fact, Dirk Lohan, who many of you may know, Mies's grandson, handled the restoration, and they've had to replace, obviously with the restoration, those very delicate, very critical interiors of the house, and uh, you know, 2 years ago. Well, let's see, Scott, it was a year and a half ago, I guess. I'm losing track. This was last spring, I believe. Flood waters are rising and they get very close, very nervous. You can see here how high they are. Look at that. Look at that. Very high. Um, the drama, will they rise? Will it rise? Will it break through? Luckily, in this case, it did not. Workers protecting. There's a whole, and Scott can talk about this, there's a whole protocol of what happens, alarms that sound and notify people and workers, and they can get there and raise the furnishings and raise things off the floor so that if the water does come through, it doesn't cause the damage that could otherwise happen. Here's a contemporary view of the house. This is by William Zubair in this photograph. This is to give you a sense of what the house looked like when Dr. Farnsworth, Edith Farnsworth, furnished it. But what a beautiful room, in my opinion. I mean, again, simple, elegant. The outside, you can see that very much coming in. Behind the light there toward the left center of the photograph, where you can sit out on that beautiful porch. But just a great, again, superlative piece of architecture, one of a kind piece of architecture. So what do you do? What can you do to deal with that flood? One option, of course, is to move the house to a place where it doesn't flood. Uh, but that spoils, to separate the house from its location that way just throws the story out of whack, and it's not something that you really want to do. The other alternative, and another alternative that's being talked about now, and I think Scott can tell more about this. I haven't caught up with this in some months now, is a proposed hydraulic system, which could lift the house in the case of the flood, and of course, return it slowly. I mean, it would lift the house gently. It wouldn't, snatch it up like a jack in the box, but that would slowly lift the house as the flood waters rose, or before they rose. And then when things return to normal, return the house back to its normal state. Some controversy around that. No, some people like John Vinci, the noted architect, doesn't really like, and Mies Devotee doesn't really like the plan. He called it. He told me it was a Rube Goldberg plan. Others obviously see this as the only way to really keep the house where it is and to keep it safe, which is the most important thing. So with all of that, drama, lawsuits, falling out, all those kind of things, naturally it's ripe for a movie. And it's been in pre-production for a couple of years now. Different cast at one point. I think Jeff Bridges was supposed to be Mies at one point, and I can't remember who's going to be Edith Farnsworth. So the way it stands now, at least last we looked, Ray Fiennes as Mies. I guess I can see it there. I hadn't seen Ray Fiennes' work since Schindler's List and maybe The English Patient, and I thought I couldn't see him as Mies van der Rohe. I could see him there a little bit there. I mean, he's a little bit younger. Well, Mies was almost 60. Ray Fiennes is probably the right age, because I think he's 2 years older than me, and I'm 55. So he's the right age. And Elizabeth Debicki is Dr. Farnsworth. What's interesting is that this actor, Elizabeth Debicki, is 6 feet tall. So she has the presence, would have the presence that Edith Farnsworth had. And if you've seen her work, she's a fantastic actress as well. So fingers crossed, I wouldn't mind seeing it. One thing that was a little disturbing about it is that it looks like, at least from Internet Movie Database, that a lot of the movie is going to be filmed in Toronto. So that's that part I don't like, but it would be good to see this get to the screen. So with that, I guess we're at the end, and I'd like to, answer questions, have Scott come in and see where this conversation takes us.
Right. Thank you, Lee. Great photographs, great story. Scott, if you want to turn your camera back on. Here we go. And your microphone too. That'd be great. And I know there were a couple of things that Lee mentioned that maybe you might be able to fill in. And well, maybe you could first comment about the thoughts about this hydraulic system. Is that something?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, the trust was in the papers a lot several years ago, because they were entertaining every idea, every possibility. And they had a team of experts from, 4 or 5 different firms around the country. And the one they landed on, of course, was the hydraulic lift solution, which was in some ways the most expensive, but also, if you believe, as the trust does, and as most Mies authorities do, that the house is a site-specific design response, then it doesn't really make sense to pick it up and move it to the middle of a cornfield somewhere. Mm-hmm. So it may be the most expensive option, but certainly very reliable. It's based on 19th century technology. So other than the electronic controls, it's tried and true technology, but it's about 50% through design right now. So it's not on a fast track by any means. It's about a $7 million project. So we'll have to do some significant fundraising, and the house needs several $1 million of restoration. So, what comes first?
And also to lose the house, obviously a shame. And we almost came close, perhaps, I guess, around 20 years ago, when it was for sale, when Lord Palumbo put it for sale, and I think, you can tell the story better than I, but others were interested in it. Landmarks Illinois and the National Trust ended up getting it, but there was talk during that time of it, perhaps being, disassembled and moved someplace else.
That's right. Yeah, it was auctioned. Lord Palumbo tried to sell it to the state of Illinois for many years as a house museum and sculpture park. And the Governor Ryan controversy was happening at the time, and the state was in deficit spending mode, surprise. And they just couldn't get their act together. And so eventually Lisa Madigan said, we're not going to buy this. So he went to Sotheby's and said, let's auction it as a work of art. So he set the precedent for that. He was really the first to do that. And several important houses have since been auctioned in that way. Roz, you want to post some questions?
Okay, sorry. Okay, we have some questions coming in, so I'm going to start going through some of these. And other questions I want to circle back to, Scott, some things that Lee maybe mentioned in his presentation. But someone made a comment here. Does the house really get wet and steamy when it rains outside? I've been to it twice and was surprised at how airy it felt on the inside.
Right, yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Lee. Yeah, you probably know her famous quote.
This is interesting. That's an interesting question. When I wrote a piece that had that quote in it, the National Trust said, "Well, that's not true," and so but they left it in the story anyway. There's a larger context, a bit of larger context with this, in that I think it was there was this kind of, how to say, there was the house being designed by a German and not looking quote unquote American. I think there was this kind of sentiment that Edith's comments either tapped into or that people who believe this pulled out of it, that there was something inherently wrong with the house. It was open to criticism. It looks so different. It's out there, and and all that kind of comes together. But other than that one quote that I found, which I think appeared in Newsweek as well as another magazine, it was the same quote. I hadn't found any other proof or anyone else who said that about the house.
Right. It didn't have air conditioning until 1997, after the flood restoration. Lord Palumbo, didn't feel the need for it. He didn't live there. It's important to point out that he used the house for meetings and cocktail parties. His house was in Plano. They were in residence for 2 months every summer. So if you had to live in the house, you might want air conditioning. But Edith never had it. She had a screened porch that was part of the original design. Lord Palumbo removed the screens in 1971. But she had a whole house fan. So she could come in on a summer night from the city and, open the doors to the screened porch and open the hopper windows at the other end of the house, turn on the whole house fan, as a lot of houses had in that time, and cool it down pretty quickly.
So there's a question from somebody who would like to know, how far is the house from the road? Can you see it from the road, or do you need to kind of, because is it a bit of a hike? And the other question related to that is, when the Fox River isn't raging, what is the distance between the river and the house? So 2 questions about distance, from the road and from the river.
Lee, you want to handle that?
From the road, I can't remember. Maybe I'll pass that to you. But from the river, is it 100 yards?
It's pretty close to that, yeah.
Yeah. So the length of a football field from the river. So that's kind of close, given how wide the river is and how open it is there. And the road, I can't remember, Scott. Can you see it from the road?
Oh, you can see, especially in the wintertime, you can see the house from the bridge, but of course there's no place to stop along the bridge. If you want to visit Farnsworth House when we're closed, the state park across the road has a drive that goes along the river. You can see it across, the water. Not so well in the summer when everything's in leaf, but the rest of the year.
Someone would like for you to talk about heating and plumbing in the house.
Would you like me to do this, Lee?
Yeah, I think I better. I mean, that core contains it all, right? But
That's
then,
right.
But how it works and any issues you may have.
Yeah, I don't know if I lean over far enough, you can kind of see. Maybe we'll go the other way. There's a little black core underneath of the house, and that's where everything comes in and out. And So the gas, telephone, electric, the sewer goes out. There's a septic field. Originally, it was heated with an oil tank underground. Now it's a heat exchange, 2 heat pumps that pump well water. And that was installed in 97 again when the house was restored after the flood. But most of the original plumbing remains, including the radiant heat system, which is leaking into the floor slab. Unfortunately, the copper tubing has disintegrated in spots, and we have a very expensive project ahead of us down the road replacing that. And we have to have the radiant heat system because, of course, the blower just kind of keeps warm air at human level and up, but the floor slab would freeze solid and the glass would break. So we really have to keep that floor slab heated. It's not a very energy efficient house. Mies at the time, Keck and Keck were using thermal pane glass, and they were having some early problems, and he just avoided it by using 1/4-inch plate glass. And so it's never been an energy efficient house, and that was one of Dr. Farnsworth's concerns.
So Edith Farnsworth owned the house, and she sold it, you said, to Lord Palumbo. And can you tell us about who he was exactly? Like, what's his story?
Oh, sure. Yeah. In fact, so this year and last year, our focus is Edith Farnsworth Reconsidered. And next year and 2023, our focus is on Lord Palumbo. And it's Every Line is a Decision, the life and legacies of Lord Peter Palumbo. He's a British lord, just retired from the House of Lords. He was former chairman of the British Arts Council. He was chairman of the Pritzker Prize in Architecture for over a decade. He was on the Warhol Foundation board, and really major cultural institutions in London and in the United States for many years, and a close friend of Princess Diana's. She never stayed at the Farnsworth House. That's one of the rumors swirling around that he has verified. She did not visit there. But anyway, he's an interesting person. He's retired. He's I think 86 this year, and so it'll be fun exploring his life in the next couple of years.
And from what I understand, the house was furnished very differently between Edith Farnsworth's era and Lord Palumbo's era. And now, did you return? How is it currently furnished? Is it more closely tied to one or the other's furnishings?
Yeah. So this is actually, your listeners probably know about the book, right? Alex Beam's book.
Well, I did put that in the chat. I'll remind them that you tell us about the book. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's a great new book written by Alex Beam, a fellow journalist. Lee must know him. Works at the Boston Globe and has written a handful of books. And this one is called Broken Glass. And he's really done some new research and uncovered some things that Franz Schultz didn't know about when he was writing his history of Mies van der Rohe biography. But one of the interesting things that he discovered is that for a while, Edith Farnsworth was going along with Mies in terms of his furniture designs, even going so far as to review, progress and reminding him that she didn't want polished chrome furniture. She wanted a dull metal finish. And then at some point, she decided that she wanted Scandinavian modern furniture. She didn't want Mies's furniture, which she thought was sort of, uncomfortable and old fashioned. And you have to remember, Mies's furniture was mainly designed in the 20s and early 30s. So it was, 20 years old or more at the time. Anyway, so she furnished her house with pieces from the Baldwin Kingery showroom in Chicago. And that's what we have the house furnished with replicas of that furniture now. And then next year and the year following, the Palumbo era Mies van der Rohe furniture will come back, along with lots of his art collection and personal accessories.
We have a couple questions. Someone would like to know, did Mies van der Rohe design other residences? If so, were they similar to this one?
Well, I want to say the Elmhurst Art Museum started off as a Mies residence. Am I right? And then I know there was it never got built though, did it? I just remembered this. There was a house, and I can't remember who the client was, but it was called, can you remember the Scott? I should look this up. It was called the 15 by 15 house or something like that.
Oh, 50 by 50 house.
50
or
by
60
50
by
house,
60
exactly.
house. Yeah.
Yeah. And but it was never built, but it was similar, but it had, like, as I recall, right, like Crown Hall, where the trusses run across the roof. I think it had it had kind of that action happening to it, which kind of lifted the house up. But I just remembered that on the fly.
Right, right. So Mies designed several houses in Europe, earlier in his career, but they look very different. So Farnsworth House really was an idea that was kicking around in his head, and you could see it in his sketches from the 1930s. And he finally had the opportunity to explore it. But then, because he was the architect and the general contractor, he worked out a lot of the details that he continued to use over and over throughout the remainder of his career. So it's really a turning point in the history of American architecture, and especially, the history of his American career. But he had a wonderful project going, which didn't happen, unfortunately. It was sort of Farnsworth House on steroids that was going to be built in Indianapolis. And I jokingly say, if it had been built, we'd all be going there rather than to the Farnsworth House. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of Mies's projects were nothing more than designs, kind of like Franklin Wright. There were many unbuilt projects in the end.
There was a comment at the very beginning of the presentation, and the person wrote, Sidney Robinson, who now owns the Ford House, feels that Sam Ford was just as important and Ruth is as important as Ruth, and wants that to come forward into history. So do you know anything about kind of that house and the story behind that?
I do not. And Sidney is fantastic. In fact, Sidney let me in the house back when I was architecture critic for the Sun Times, and he related that Cole story to me. But yes, Sam kind of falls away, and he's right. I mean, he was obviously, there were a couple. They were obviously there, for the beginning of the house, and I should do more work to bring out Sam's story.
Someone has a comment and writes, regarding the hydraulic lift system, how would the utility connections work in that scenario? I have to assume there need to be a means by which to disconnect plumbing, electric before raising the house.
That's right. You're thinking ahead. That's great. So it's actually very clever. Basically, they lift the house up, move it, and it's all done by micrometers. So if anything goes out of alignment, even a millimeter, it stops the building moving equipment. Anyway, they move the house into the backyard. They basically dig in a basement, a pit, and the hydraulic system, as Lee showed, is a bunch of basically trusses or scissor jacks that kind of slide on a track rather than lifting the house individual, so it stays in alignment. As it lifts, it takes 45 minutes to raise in the air. The utilities pull out of an underground tunnel. And so there's a flexible connection on all of these utilities. They pull out of the tunnel. There is an ejection pit or ejector pit in the basement of the basement, if you will. And after the flood, all the mud and debris gets cleaned out, pumped out of there, and the house goes back down. But it can hold up in the air for days, potentially weeks. It has a propane backup, or maybe natural gas, I'm not sure which, but anyway, in case the power goes off for extended periods. There's a woven stainless steel or Teflon, I'm not sure what it is, mesh curtain that pulls up with the house so that if logs and debris come down the river, they get caught, filtered out. So it's a very clever system, just very expensive.
I bet. Wow. Someone wrote a comment here and writes, dare I mention the name Wright here? Any documentation of Frank Lloyd Wright visiting the home?
None. No. In fact, I love the famous quote in 1945 when he came to the MoMA show. He said it was much ado about almost nothing.
Oh, wow. Scott, can you also tell us a little bit about what is happening at the house right now if someone would like to visit?
Sure. Did I just post that?
Oh, yeah. Let me make you a co-host if you want, and you can pull that up.
Okay.
Let me do that right now. Okay.
Okay, so I'll do screen share, and here we are. So this Sunday, I just popped this in your chat box. We have a Modern in the Middle Road Rally. It's our first event like this, and hopefully we'll do it every other year going forward. But it's really focused this time on MCM houses in the Fox River Valley. It's a fun concept. You can stay in your car. Everything's located by GPS. There's an information blurb that comes up about each house. Some of the homeowners will actually be out in the yard, and you can park and get out and take pictures. So that's a fun kind of thing and COVID safe. But if you go to our website, you'll see these tabs across there. Everything you need is right there under visit, all of the tour and ticket options, events and programs, all upcoming as well as past events. Our gallery, which is next to our visitor center. We have a blurb about our current exhibition as well as upcoming exhibitions and past exhibitions. We have a virtual reality tour, a lot of videos and links on our watch and read tabs. If you're really interested in the flood mitigation, here's all you ever wanted to know. And then of course, we welcome anyone to make a contribution or even to shop online, our Farnsworth House shop. Most of the items are also available online. I do have to say that this current exhibition is great. It was actually done at the request of the late John Bryan. So John Bryan led the charge back in 2002 to form the Friends of Farnsworth and get folks from around the world really to contribute to buying the house at auction and gifting it to the National Trust with a preservation and conservation easement by Landmarks Illinois. Because as Lee said, Sotheby's had prepared a video showing how you would disassemble the house and it could be shipped anywhere in the world. And indeed, there were folks who were going to buy it and disassemble it. So kudos to John Bryan. He asked before he passed a few years ago if his friend Elizabeth Daniels could photograph the house. So the current exhibition is absolutely lovely, and I hope you'll come out and see it.
And as we were talking, I think a little earlier, Scott, so the house has been, aside from some periods when Illinois museums were shut down entirely, there's been kind of tours in some version going on consistently.
Yeah, we were very lucky in that the Botanic Garden and the Arboretum, Morton Arboretum, were allowed to reopen on July 1st, and so were we, with outdoor access, outdoor tours. So you can picnic, hike. We have a new canoe and kayak landing. A lot of folks canoe and kayak on the Fox River, so they can stop at the Farnsworth House now, sunbathe, throw a frisbee, just not at the glass, please. But then, of course, we had indoor tours when Illinois museums were allowed to open. But the only time our indoor spaces have been closed is when the Art Institute and other.
So how many people, how many square feet is the house?
Well, I always say it's about 1,200 usable square feet. It may be a little bit more or less depending, on how you use the house, but it was intended to be larger though, because the upper deck was screened in, and the original concept was that, there's this indoor-outdoor flow. The lower terrace, we only have a couple photos of her using it, and she actually brought her Scandinavian modern furniture out of the house and put it out on the deck to entertain, So it's really casual. I mean, this wasn't an architectural masterwork for Edith Farnsworth. It was a weekend house. So it's important to kind of keep that in perspective.
Right. So the house is not a huge home, and so when you're doing these indoor tours, I imagine there's not small groups, very small groups are going through the house at a time.
Yeah. We only have 12 people on a tour, so it's very safe. You can spread out more than 6 feet. We have the air circulation going, 24/7 in the house. Same with our visitor center and our gallery. We just have limits right now. We're taking a little bit of a financial hit, of course, because we're used to having 20 people on a tour, so it's challenging.
Right. Well, I hope that you're back to normal soon.
All of us, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we got through a lot of the questions that were coming through here in the chat. I think we addressed all of them. Someone made a comment here that Lord Palumbo also owns Kentuck Knob, the Hagen House by Frank Lloyd Wright in Pennsylvania.
That's right. Yeah, he was known as a historic house collector. He had a wonderful country estate that Princess Diana and the boys visited a few times. And there's a famous quote that one of them said, "Mommy, whoever owns this must be rich." And she very loudly, and Diana said, "Fortunate, dear, very fortunate." But he was known to be a collector of heritage properties in the 1970s and 80s. And then when he sold the Farnsworth House, many of the things that were in the Farnsworth House went to the Frank Lloyd Wright House, which, as your guest said, is available for tours, and it's wonderful sculpture collection as well as the house itself. And it's later Frank Lloyd Wright, very modern, and it's located near falling water. So it's an easy sort of, 1-2 day of it. But
There's a question here. Someone would like to know, did Philip Johnson ever comment on the Farnsworth House? I don't know. Maybe you can tell us who Philip Johnson is, whoever wants to take that question.
Lee, do you want to handle that?
Well, yeah, Philip Johnson, a 20th century architect who of note, and he had a long career because he lived to be 90 something, right? And wasn't there, now this is where my memory, getting older now, but there was a bit of a back and forth between them and in their house that was almost, I mean, how would you describe it? It's not as deep as love-hate, but clearly, I mean, talk about it a little bit, Scott. I mean, it was.
Yeah. So Philip Johnson was actually involved with the Farnsworth House, which is
That's
kind
right.
of interesting. Yeah, he and it depends on which version of the story you go with. But he was very close to Mies, of course, since before Mies came to the United States, even, and he would often come into Chicago and walk around and talk to the boys. Hey, what are you working on? And take notes and make sketches of what was on their drawing table. So given that Mies got so much attention over the Farnsworth House sketch and model in 1945 at the MoMA show, it's no surprise that Philip Johnson, who was an heir to the Alcoa aluminum fortune, built his own glass house very quickly before the Farnsworth House was actually built. So he kind of beat Mies to the punch. But then when Mies saw it, he said, well, the problem is you didn't copy me closely enough. You got a lot of the details wrong. But yeah, it's a wonderful house. I mean, they're both National Trust properties. It's black rather than white. It sits directly on the ground versus being raised up. It actually has a red brick floor and low foundation, which to me kind of feels sort of, I don't know, New Englandish. So I think they're both very evocative of their time and place. Anyway, so I was going to say that basically because they were so close, when Mies was in financial straits, Philip got his attorney or his bookkeeper to come in, accountant, I think, to come in and review Mies's book. And he said, well, what's all this, unpaid hours on this Farnsworth project? You need to put a lien on the house and get that money. So Philip really was responsible for starting the row between Edith and Mies.
Interesting.
And he was actually one of the first people to visit the Farnsworth House too, shortly after its completion, and he had to smooth feathers, kind of keep Edith positive about Mies, and then quickly sent a letter to Mies saying that I visited with Edith and she's glowing about the house, trying to, smooth feathers, as they say.
So Scott, how long has it been since the house has been owned by the trust? Was it from after Lord Palumbo ownership that it became?
Yes, 2004. So the auction was in 2003. Jeff Baer had a special, and you can watch it online, saved from the Wrecking Ball, and it's available on YouTube. So yeah, our 75th anniversary is coming up quickly. Or no, it's 75th anniversary or birthday of the house, the 20th birthday of Farnsworth House being open to the public.
Right.
Is coming up.
Oh gosh, thank goodness it was like saved and restored. It'd be hard to, I mean, it's such a treasure.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, because we have talented people like Lee writing about us, it keeps us in circulation.
Well, thanks, and of course your incredible stewardship of the house, getting people, because it's a trek, from downtown Chicago, even, let alone from northwest suburbs. I mean, as you can see, I mean, was it 40 miles from Chicago's downtown? 35 miles?
Yeah, we tell everybody allow 2 hours. It used to be 90 minutes, but with increasing traffic in the western suburbs, it's about 2 hours from downtown.
Yeah.
You can also take the train or when you feel safe to do so, to Aurora, and then it's just 18 miles. So you can get there, taxi, ride share. There's even a Kendall County transport bus. It's only like $2.50 or something. You just have to schedule in advance. And being that it's a very rural county, they'll drop you off and say, what time would you like me to pick you up? So people don't know about it. And it's only weekdays, but it's very affordable. So,
are there any neighboring homes? Like, how close is the next neighbor?
Well, there are a few homes that were built about 20 years ago, right across the road. But no, that was part of the appeal, that it was surrounded by large farms, and Edith, was kind of a very private person, and so she didn't have neighbors to really contend with. She only had a handful of local friends, was a little bit of a loner. But she was, intellectually curious. She taught herself, or learned, I should say, 7 languages over the course of her life. And as well as being a research physician, she had her own laboratory and was a professor at Northwestern School of Medicine. She also volunteered doing midwife tasks in lower income communities. She played classical violin, and she wrote poetry and translated poetry. In fact, that was her last career. As Lee may have said, when she sold the house in the 1960s, she retired to Florence and lived in a 17th century villa with hardly any windows. So very ironic. But she wrote and translated a lot of poetry from the Italian language into the English language.
So just a really intelligent, accomplished woman.
Yeah, and very driven, yeah.
We have a question from someone who would like to know, is the freestanding wooden chest in the house currently? And if it's not, will it be in the future?
Yeah, it's actually, so the original is gone. Unfortunately, it was ruined in the 96 flood. Lord Palumbo had the hardware taken off and had it replicated in teak. It's not clear that the original was teak. We think it was Primavera because it was blonde to match the wood core. And by the 1990s, of course, all of Palumbo's furniture was brown teak. And so he had the wardrobe made in brown teak. That is actually now on display in our gallery building next to the visitor center. And for Edith Farnsworth Reconsidered, there's a blonde wardrobe in the house that more closely recalls the original.
Okay, well, I think we handled all these questions. Lots of thoughtful questions. Clearly, a number of the people that are watching this webinar were already very knowledgeable about architecture or the home or things of that nature, or other contemporary architects. So we have this, great group of patrons that join our programs, and that's why I knew they'd be very enthusiastic about this topic. So Scott and Lee, I just want to thank you both for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your sharing your knowledge with us. There's some really nice comments coming in the chat. I hope you'll take a look at that about all the people that really enjoyed it. So I thank you for your time and for sharing with us, and everybody at home. I'm so glad that you joined us today. We hope to see you again soon. We'll continue to do programming into the summer, and we actually have a couple outdoor programs this summer at the library. So please be sure to check our calendar, our online calendar, for those events. So I'm going to say goodbye. Have a nice afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Scott.